Welcome to the Pharmacy Inspection Podcast, where we discuss topics related to sterile and non-sterile compounding pharmacy in an effort to promote compliance and increase quality. Please welcome your hosts, Bryan Prince and Seth DePasquale.
Hello to all of our compounding pharmacy colleagues and friends, and welcome to the first inaugural episode of the Pharmacy Inspection Podcast. We're going to talk about all things compounding, compliance, engineering, USP, and all of those things that you want to talk about. And along the way, we're going to elicit your feedback and shape our discussions around that. My name is Bryan, and joining me on this mission is Seth.
Hey everybody, this is Seth DePasquale. Just want to go over what exactly our mission is for this whole podcast thing. It's a really cool way for us to get out and have an open, honest discourse on the topics and issues related to compounding pharmacy, all in an effort to promote compliance, improve the quality of the products we compound, and even better structure the lab environments that we work in. So I really hope that you're going to enjoy this podcast. We are going to talk about a lot of hot topics. The really big hot topic on the table right now is USP 800. But before we get into that, let's kind of talk about where we came from and who we are. So, Bryan, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into all this?
Absolutely. I appreciate it, Seth, and I'm going to enjoy this adventure. Back in 2009, I was working for a containment company, and what that means is we designed and we engineered environments mostly for pharma back then. So your companies like your Glaxo, your Mercks, and at that R&D level when they were doing drug discovery, our main mission, our main goal was personnel protection. Along the way, I got introduced to the wonderful world of compounding pharmacy. I was, of course, intrigued because it's all entrepreneurial based, and entrepreneurs are really the backbone of our economy, of our country, and we really make things happen. And so I wanted to know more about what compounding pharmacy was. So I started going out. This was probably around 2012. I was going out around probably at 12 to 15 different states, visiting compounding pharmacies and really doing observations. And what I saw during those observations of compounding were what I would call powder handling faux pas, right? And I'll go ahead and tell you that the way that powder is handled at the bench level in pharma is pretty much exactly the same way that it's handled in compounding pharmacy. Now, don't mishear what I just said. I didn't call any of us here manufacturers. That's not my goal by any means, but the purpose or the principles of workflow are exactly the same, because safety and handling chemicals is a very transferable type technology. So I started writing some articles that got published, and two of them were actually in the IJPC, the International Journal of Pharmaceutical Compounding. And from that, I started getting invitations to speak at various conferences, compounding specific, and telling the story of personnel protection. And this was really predated before USP 800. This was before, 795 and 797 are great chapters because they talk about product quality, and we're putting the best quality product out of our labs, out of our pharmacies that we could possibly do that. But they left out that component called the personnel. So around 2014, the draft copy of USP 800 had hit the presses. It was brand new, and I remember I was speaking at a conference, and everybody now, I was an outlier in the beginning, right? Because I was the only person really talking about personnel safety. Not that it wasn't on the radar, but I was pretty much the only person talking about it. But now we're in a position where people wanted to talk more about that. And so lo and behold, as USP 800 has gained strength and gained momentum, I'm now an independent consultant. I do workflow, design, compliance type things. The majority of my time is spent actually designing facilities and the engineering controls that help pharmacies become compliant with USP 800. So with that being said, Seth, why don't you tell us your story as well?
Sure, absolutely. I'm Seth DePasquale. I am a compounding pharmacist. Not necessarily where I started out. Started out in doing retail pharmacy when I first graduated in 2002. Went into the military, was in the Air Force for a few years. Then moved on to Kentucky where I live now, and I found this gig of compounding pharmacy sort of through accident, I was at a hospital pharmacy. I was doing some interesting things that are probably not considered traditional pharmacy, doing some remote order entry. Got out of there and was looking for a change. Did a little bit of retail. Realized that didn't really that wasn't going to work out in the long term. And I found this job, and honestly, it's been an interesting adventure. I along the way I found out, that this is really my passion. What I absolutely love coming to work on a daily basis, and love figuring all this stuff out. There's a lot of things that go into this in terms of making sure your quality is dead on every single time, and it sort of just really relates to my personality. I definitely have the typical type A personality of a pharmacist. I like things neat and in 90-degree angles and that sort of thing. So this just takes it a step even further, and getting into this whole quality and trying to spread what it means to be a quality compounding pharmacy and all the things that entails, spreading that out amongst the rest of the compounding industry. I just see it's a great opportunity to kind of spread the knowledge that I've learned over the last few years. And I've met a lot of really cool people along the way. So yeah, that's basically my mission. I increasing the quality of compounding, nationwide. And compounding gets I think a little bit of bad press here lately in light of recent events, and it's a pretty hot topic within pharmacy. And yeah, I'm really excited about doing this with you, and hopefully we can make some changes.
Yeah, you use the word kind of by accident, and I've used that terminology in the past as well. It was not my intention by any means to jump into this industry, because I really don't have a lot of the experience. I'm not a certified technician. I'm not a pharmacist. I'm not a lot of the things that you find very typical in this industry. But I was carrying the shield, or carrying the flag, as I used earlier, for personnel protection, really talking about aspects of USP 800 before there was a USP 800. I remember one of the conferences that I was speaking at, and I'm thinking this was probably 2013, maybe 2014, because I remember the original draft guidance for 800 had just been released, and I was speaking at a conference, and there was 150 chairs in the room, and at that time it became standing room only, because at that point, before, I was an outlier, right? I was the guy who was always talking about safety, chemical handling safety, powder handling safety, and safety was always, in my mind, it was always a secondary thought. And I get the fact that USP 795 and USP 797, it's about, we're going to put the best quality product out of our lab that we can possibly do that, and I appreciate that. But flash into this conference where it's 150 people standing room only, because now everybody has to start dealing with this issue of safety, because USP 800 has come to be. But I remember at the end of this conference, I had a young lady who was at the end of when you get finished speaking, people want to come to you and say, "Hey, I appreciate you speaking to us. I enjoyed the points of conversation. I've got one more question." And then people started funneling out. And I could tell that this young lady in the background, she was going to make sure that she was the last person in the room to ask me a question. And so finally she gets up to me, and there's nobody else in the room, it's just the two of us. And she says, "Do you feel like the reason why I've had 3 miscarriages is because I work in a compounding pharmacy?" Right. So that was kind of that moment of like, wow, this is, safety has really hit home for me. Chemical handling safety is really validated by what she said. Now, again, we can't absolutely pinpoint whether or not that was the case. She may have had other underlying medical issues, endometriosis. Sure. There's so many other factors that could have contributed to that. So we couldn't absolutely pin it on compounding. And by no means, don't mishear me, I'm not trying to pinpoint it on compounding. I used that story as an example to say, are we truly concerned about the safety of our personnel as it relates to handling chemicals, specifically in powder? Because and I say this semi-frequently, that if you're going to have a personal exposure, real personal exposure, it's more than likely going to happen on the non-sterile side, which is where I spend the majority of my time, versus that of the sterile side, simply because in a non-sterile atmosphere, our current 795 labs, we've got no ISO classified air, we've got no X number of air changes, we've got none of those things that are present currently on 797. We've got no PPE standards. there are no real engineering control standards that have been set forth by 795. And so understanding that what we are doing in consideration of the volume of the powders that we're handling and the chemicals that we're handling, whether they're hazardous or whether they're not. And you and I have talked about this, Seth, that just because NIOSH has considered a chemical to be hazardous doesn't mean that another chemical, let's just say gabapentin, ketoprofen, any of these other chemicals that we handle on a regular basis, that they don't have some sort of occupational exposure level. And so you can find a lot of that information on SDSs, and maybe in later on podcasts, or maybe later on in this podcast, we'll talk about the safety data sheets, because really our mission for this podcast is going to be all over the board. We want to make sure that we bring the best ideas on compounding as it relates to compliance. We want to bring some of the best guests. We've got some really awesome guests lined up, starting weeks 3, 4, 5, and beyond that. We're lining them up, and people are excited about the mission that we've undertaken here. So this is going to be a great mission, a great time for us to share together and share best practices, and really talk about how do you get into compliance. How do you, and it isn't going to be necessarily just to 800. It's going to be about 795 and 797 and any other standard that we can talk about. So just an exciting time to move forward. And I'll pause there because I don't want to feel like I'm taking over this entire podcast. So I certainly want Seth to talk through some of the issues he has as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you touched a little bit there on the end at 797, 795. There's plenty of opportunity to improve our practices and across the board. I think, I get a lot of questions here since I started this whole website, and talking about various aspects of quality. I just got an email the other day about beyond use dating, and how to actually go about doing that with the new revisions that are coming out with 797. Where do you think that's going to go? It's really cutting down on our beyond use dating down to 45 days with no real option. So what is the option out there? What are we going to do beyond 45 days? And I think, and my answer was, I think that quite clearly there's a huge need for everyone to want and have extended beyond use dating. But how do we accomplish that? And that's a question. It goes into a deep, dark rabbit hole of an answer that I don't think many compounding pharmacies have ventured down. But what it really entails is doing a stability indicating study. And it's something that industry is very well aware of, and that's how they operate. We're talking the world of expiration dates and stuff like that. So, there's a whole bunch of these topics that we have lined up, and the guests that are going to be coming on to share their information, what they've learned. And I think really in all this, I wouldn't pin myself as necessarily an expert in all this stuff. I am a student of all this stuff, and I will never stop learning. And I think that's another, side mission that we have, is that to continue to learn and educate ourselves as well as others in all this stuff from the people that do this on a daily basis. And we have quite the number of contacts, like Bryan said, that are lined up, that are going to be talking to us about very specific things and some more broad categories of compounding. And we're really excited. I hope in the coming weeks that you're going to continue joining us and listening in on all the exciting topics that we have going on.
So let's go ahead and talk about the elephant in the room, and that's the delay of 800. So I know there's some people are glad, some people are not. Me personally, because this has been my mission for a long time, I was not super excited to see the delay, but I realize why it happened. There does need to be harmonization to a certain degree. So it is what it is. And I currently, the majority of my work that I do is design engineering specifically for that USP 800 component, with a lot of emphasis on workflow. I do 3-dimensional design, or actually build the labs with the hoods, the EMPs, the mills, all of those pieces of equipment, because I want to make sure that the workflow is right. But currently I have 12 active projects going on. And of those, I've already got 2 that have already come forth and said, you know what, we're gonna pump the brakes on this and we're gonna wait, even though it's in 18 months from now. We still want to pump the brakes, and I'm okay with that because it's certainly your prerogative. But my mission is still exactly the same, to help my clients answer the number one question of how much is this going to cost, and whether or not you determine how much it's going to cost now or how much it's going to cost 18 months from now is going to be, in terms of price increases of building materials or whatever, is really negligible, right? what
Absolutely.
entrepreneur what entrepreneur in their right mind would not want to be able to see a glimpse into their capital budget for 2019? Basically, where we've opened up this door to the year 2019, and you can look at it and go, okay, my capital budget, my capital expenditures for 2019 are going to be 75,000, 100,000, 125,000, whatever that magic number is that's going to bring me into compliance with USP 800. Because if I know that number now, and I know that I've got 18 months to plan for it, well, I'll just toss this over to you. Seth, how would you handle that door being open for you to see what your capital expenditure budget needs to look like?
You know, it's actually it's a good opportunity to figure out, okay, how are we going to do this? Even though this has been, on the book, so to speak, since 2014, more or less. It gives a little bit of a glimpse into, what can I do in terms of meeting this compliance standard, or meeting this standard and becoming compliant. What am I going to do in the next 18 months to get that going? From a business perspective, we at my pharmacy, it was just one of those things that we just had to take care of. In fact, with my pharmacy, we technically, even by USP 797 standards, how they're written, we weren't totally compliant with it. So it was one of those things that we just had to get it done. And I don't think we're there yet with everybody across the board in the entire country. In fact, I'm on the task force for Kentucky with USP 800, making recommendations for the board, and sitting in on some of those meetings. You have to come to the understanding and realization that there's a whole lot of people that are really scared about all this because of the capital expenditure. In that there's, I think, a misunderstanding on the part of pharmacists and pharmacies of what all that entails. And I think the big fear comes from the whole money aspect of it. I mean, let's get the elephant out of the room. It's like you said, it's a big capital expenditure for sure. However, there are definitely ways around, and I'm not trying to say to skirt the standard, but there are built-in ways to not necessarily comply fully with the standard. And I don't think people, I mean, I hate to say this, but I just don't think everyone across the board has actually read the entire standard. Plain and simple. So, that's another point that we should sort of address. USP 800 basically says that if you're working with some various dosage forms, not actually compounding with these, but simply counting them out, tablets, capsules, you are able to get around complying with all the engineering controls that are laid out within USP 800 by just simply doing a risk assessment. And again, sitting in on this meeting in Kentucky here, there's a lot of people that are even confused, I think, about doing a risk assessment. And am I going to have to do this for all the drugs that are hazardous? Can I bracket some of these drugs? Can I just do drug classes? And all that sort of is almost being dealt with at the state level, I guess. And that's kind of where Kentucky's at right now. But it's an odd situation. You've had a national standard or international standard, really. USP, even though it's United States pharmacopoeia, it's recognized worldwide. That has had a little bit of pushback, and every board of pharmacy has their own opinion and is taking their own tack on what exactly to do. So it's really interesting times with all this. I don't think that. I think at the end of the day, everyone just has to do sort of what we here at my pharmacy did, and realize that it's for the safety of your own operators. It's only you that's hurting you by not complying with some of these standards. And it is a little bit of a turn in direction for the USP. It's not really focused specifically on the product itself. It's focused on the operator. So I think there has been a lot of pushback for the monetary reasons, and I think getting people to realize what dosage form specifically, just this is your wheelhouse, Bryan. If you're handling powders that are hazardous, you should definitely have the engineering controls in place to deal with them. Agreed? I think we can all agree on that.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the messiest operations that I see, and maybe messiest isn't the right term, but I'm going to use that anyway, that I see that's done a lot is progesterone encapsulation, right? We've got 2, 3, sometimes 4 different chemicals. We're weighing, we're triturating, we're spreading, we're tamping. We're doing so many different interactive things that it is just a very messy operation. And so that particular operation, I can tell you, you're not going to get by with just saying I've got a class 1 powder hood and that's going to be my end all be all, because there has to be there absolutely needs to be a risk assessment around that process, because in doing workflow studies and doing lab observations, the number one thing, if you've ever heard me speak, I use this term as breaching of containment. The dirty gloves come in and they come out, and they come in and they come out, meaning from the face opening of the hood. And that is the number one safety violation. We're taking our dirty weigh boats at the very end, and where do we dispose of those? We throw them into an open face trash can, where of course powder continues to micronize as the airflow changes, as the relative humidity changes, as people walk by, as we impact that trash can with new garbage on top of it. Again, there's a consistent micronization, and then Brownie is going to come by and it's going to take those particles wherever it wants to take it, whether it's in our breathing zone, whether it's on our bodies, whether it's on a counter, whether it's on a surface. And a lot of times I find it on door jambs. So in my mind, the risk assessment, I actually just wrote a paper about this, is performing a hazardous drug risk assessment. And you can actually download that paper at learn.newair.com. And what I try to do is I try to demystify that whole risk assessment process, right? Letting people know that it is not as overwhelming, because the whole chapter in itself is overwhelming. And I'll rewind back to a little bit of that financial component, because as an entrepreneur, what are your top 3 concerns every single day? I can tell you exactly what it is: cash flow, cash flow, cash flow. And so I absolutely get where pharmacy owners are at right now with USP 800, and almost with the sigh of relief that yes, it has been pushed back, and are they going to do any more revisions? And I get all that. So, but in my mind, something absolutely needed to be done from the personnel protection. And I don't care how many podcasts we do, or how many times you've seen me speak, or how many papers you've read of mine. It is going to be, and I'm going to continue to carry that flag and push for personnel protection. I'm absolutely on board with what 795 and 797 say, with quality. But I will make this powerful assertion that I've said many times before: a safe process oftentimes, more times, will equal a quality product. There is an absolute interconnectedness, or a daisy chain of sorts, for lack of a better term, where those two pieces are intimately connected with each other. Would you agree or disagree with that?
I totally agree with that, actually. Yeah, and honestly, that just makes sense. The more these things just coincide, and they're on parallel tracks. If we're gowning up properly and using our engineering controls properly, not only are we're protecting ourselves from the powders coming in, being inhaled, but we're also protecting the product. So yeah, absolutely, that they go hand in hand for sure. I'm interested to see what you, the listener, actually has to say about all this. Where does the rest of the country lie in all this? Is it all just about the bottom line? Are you taking consideration the risks associated with dealing with powders in particular, or are you in a hospital and you're dealing with chemo, or using closed system transfer devices? What's going on in your particular setting? We're really interested to hear what you have to say. There's a place on the website to actually go, and you can either record your voice, leave a voicemail right on the website on pharmacyinspection.com, or even just email us at podcast@pharmacyinspection.com. Let us know what you think. We're really interested to hear. I talked a little bit about how, people are really resistant to change and not really wanting to kind of take hold of 800 and ownership, and automatically by default, I feel like we really resist change, and we will say, well, that's not possible, or I don't feel like we really need to do this. Well, what if it is possible? I guess as a kid, I grew up always hearing from my brother that you can do anything you set your mind to. And as cheesy as that sounds, I actually still believe it to this day. So we can, anything is possible. So let's keep that in mind in making some of these changes and committing to quality, committing to continuous quality improvement. And weeks ahead, I hope you join us in this journey, and I really appreciate you guys listening, and thank you, Bryan, for doing this with me. This is, I think it's going to be a great podcast, and I'm really excited. So
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today. We hope that you find our discussions on all things compounding to be stimulating and thought-provoking. Our mission here at Pharmacy Inspection Podcast is to inform and educate our audience in an effort to improve the quality of compounded products, promote compliance, and assist with the daily challenges in the compounding environment. As business owners, Seth and I are working in the compounding arena, so we're excited to share our collective knowledge and passion in support of this mission. Our goal is to produce bi-weekly podcasts where all kinds of compounding topics are discussed in an open forum. Our list of guests from this industry is growing, and we will gladly share their wisdom with you, our audience. If you have any questions or comments for us, you can email us at podcast@pharmacyinspection.com or post a question on our Facebook page or our Twitter feed @PharmacyInspect. Follow us on our Twitter feed to get a preview of the lineup in our upcoming episodes at pharmacyinspection.com. Until then, keep raising the bar.